The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Well, today we have Dr. Suzanne Humphries on. Good morning, Dr. Suzanne Humphries.
Good morning, Polly. Good morning, CHD.
Well, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the new vaccine of the week. The vaccine of the week today is DTaP and Tdap, and we're going to be talking about whooping cough. So what is worse, getting the vaccine or getting the illness? So over to you, Dr. Suzanne Humphries, to explain to us.
Okay, great. Yes, it's a very good discussion to be had. So I want to first just talk about the disease itself, just give a little bit of a well-rounded introduction to whooping cough. And so whooping cough is mostly a cough, okay? Generally, people don't have fevers. It doesn't usually go systemic unless things start to get out of control. So for the first couple of weeks, you might just have what looks like a common cold. And then you have what's called the paroxysmal stage, which you can get these uncontrollable coughing fits. And in younger children, you'll hear this high-pitched, loud whoop when there's inhalation. And so a lot of parents will report vomiting and exhaustion, and children can also turn blue when they're holding their breath. Now, this is not desirable. This is the kind of the scary part and why we want to have some treatments for it. And it is treatable, and we'll talk about that. So next slide. So this is the thing that kind of people worry about. This called cyanosis or blueness that can happen due to the lack of available oxygen, and then encephalopathy. You'll hear people talk about that, even though with the whooping cough itself, it's actually exceptionally rare. However, when it comes to the vaccines, especially the DPT, it was infamous for encephalopathy, which is why they created the DTaP. Which I've talked about before, and we can talk about more at the end if you want, if we have time. Lung damage is exceptionally rare. There can sometimes be a perforation in the lung or a lung collapse if things go out of control or if there's some susceptibility in the lung due to genetic diseases. So why can things go wrong when there's whooping cough? Well, the first thing is lack of foundational health. Like the best case scenario is a non-jabbed mother who gets pregnant and doesn't get jabs when she's pregnant and has the baby naturally and then breastfeeds the baby and doesn't take it all out all over the world into coffee clubs, et cetera, so it can get infected with whooping cough before 2 months of age. But lack of foundational health can be a big problem, especially in older children, in jabbed children, when there's poor nutrition, or when there's underlying disease. Also, it's very important. This is a toxin-mediated disease, and this is something to really understand. And that if you don't have healthy liver function and good bowel motion, then you're not going to be able to have the detoxification and removal of those pertussis toxins. And then anyone with any underlying lung or airway conditions can be more susceptible and problematic. And then the biggest factor, as we see with measles and other diseases, is incompetent medical personnel that have lack of knowledge. And you should know that if you're going to have trouble handling the whooping cough itself, you're probably going to have trouble handling the vaccine and vice versa. All right, so the next slide. So this is what you'll see on the internet when you ask about what is the usual cause of death in children who have pertussis, and it's usually severe pneumonia or oxygen deprivation when people, the babies stop breathing or they get exhaustion and have coughing fits. I've actually never seen this happen in my care. I've had children go into hospital, but the hospitals don't actually do anything, and there have been no deaths on my watch. And you can see all the other basically potential problems that could happen there. Bacterial and viral complications, in my experience, in my opinion, they don't have to exist. And when whooping cough is treated early with commitment on the parent's part, none of the above has to take place. And most children who die like this were unhealthy to begin with, and they were not supported to eliminate the toxin that the bacteria produces. They were not treated diligently with an understanding of the infection and an understanding of the immune system. Okay, next. So which vaccines do we have currently? So Polly asked me to talk about DTaP and Tdap. So on the left side, you can see that we have in the USA the available diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis. So that's got the big D, big T, small a, big P. And this is usually given to babies and children under 7-year-old because it has a higher amount of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis antigens in there. And now you've got the big T, small d, small a, small p, tetanus, diphtheria, acellular pertussis, exactly the same except for the doses. So it'll still have because whatever has the capital is where you have the higher doses, okay? So you have a smaller amount of diphtheria and acellular pertussis and the regular amount of tetanus. And then in New Zealand, same thing, pretty much under different names. And let's go to the next slide. So here's the question. And if you look through the medical literature, you go online and you'll see all this discussion among medical professionals and vaccinologists about how, the DTaP or the TDAP, they're really safe to give every time there's a pregnant woman. It's really safe to give, but but there's some concern about giving the other antigens. And so just to be nice, just to calm and allay people's fears, not because there's really any problem with it, we should consider creating a single pertussis vaccine. And so there has been some single pertussis vaccines developed. The first that I'm aware of recently, I should say, because in the old days, I think there was, but in Thailand. So Thailand has a genetically engineered standalone pertussis vaccine that's been available since 2017, okay? And now to the next slide, slide 7. Just recently, the European Union created a standalone vaccine that is not genetically engineered. It's a pertussis-only vaccine, allows for booster vaccination in pregnant women and adults without requiring additional tetanus or diphtheria boosters. Not because there's anything wrong with the tetanus and diphtheria, of course, but because we just want to be nice and offer this. So I suppose if you really believe in your vaccines and you just want to get this, that you need to take a flight to the European Union or to Thailand. Otherwise, you're going to get jabbed with tetanus and diphtheria every time there's a pregnancy or every time one of your grandchildren is born, if you're a compliance person. Okay, so on to slide 8. So this is the European Union's new standalone vaccine called Vacpertagen. And I just described it, but I just want to show you some of the ingredients. So we have the regular pertussis toxin, which is pretty much in all of them, and then filamentous hemagglutinin is in just about all the ones that are available in the USA as well. You've got your aluminum hydroxide adjuvant. You've got your salt, that's okay, water for injection, and formaldehyde. All right. So next slide, slide 9. So this is our most used vaccine in the USA. And you can see that it's got the diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, acellular pertussis antigens, pertussis toxin, filamentous hemagglutinin, pertactin, and then the Fimbriae FIM. And then other ingredients include aluminum phosphate, formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, and 2-phenoxyethanol. Now, it says on the package insert that 2-phenoxyethanol is not as a preservative. Well, I'm just a little puzzled by that because if you look up how 2-phenoxyethanol is used, it's usually used as a preservative. It's generally regarded as safe, the GRAS at low doses. But if you look up the warnings on 2-phenoxyethanol, not for vaccines, but just in general, you'll see skin irritation, allergic reactions, nervous system effects, hormonal disruption, cognitive disturbances, and that's just if it's on the skin. But it's okay to inject it numerous times. How many times do we do these injections? 5, okay? Great vaccine, right? 5 injections. So the first dose, I should say 6 weeks. I made a typo there. First dose is at 6 weeks, and then the third dose will finish the primary series, and that's when babies are considered fully immune. And then dose 4 and 5 are boosters, and they're given to the older children. And most of the literature says that doses 4 and 5 are responsible for the most adverse events. But if you look at the package inserts, that certainly doesn't seem to be true. The younger babies certainly have significant amount of adverse events, which we'll get to in a minute. So they use this formaldehyde inactivation, and that's probably the reason for the ineffectiveness of the vaccines, because as I've talked about earlier, is when you use formaldehyde to inactivate the toxins, that it changes the conformation of them. So the body doesn't recognize them the same as it would recognize the natural whooping cough toxins from the bacteria. And above that is that it can happen that these detoxified vaccines can revert back to be more virulent, just like, polio vaccines did. Well, so can these toxins. It's very well acknowledged. So I talked about the genetic modification, which is deemed more reliable and more safe, but that's not what's done in USA's vaccine right now. That's Thailand's vaccine. And here, if anyone's interested in antigen composition, I'm not going to spend time on this. I just basically went through it again. But just know that Dapticel is kind of like your baseline vaccine. And then all the other ones, except for the very last one, just have different amounts of antigens or maybe additional vaccines added to them. Why am I such an anti-vaxxer? What's the problem with vaccines, all right? Now, mind you, I'll just tell you again, I never had a horse in this race. I've done nothing but lose financially and my reputation by speaking out against vaccines, because I did some research as a conventional medical doctor and decided that I want nothing to do with vaccination. I would not want anyone I love to ever get any vaccine, and I will never take a vaccine unless it's against my will. Okay, so I'm a complete anti-vaxxer. But let's just look at the facts here. So vaccination can't be done on infants until 6 weeks of age. And so by 2 months, I believe that whooping cough is manageable with diligence and commitment. Why do I believe that? Because I've been treating whooping cough now since 2012. All around the world, different parents that have been really upset when they see the baby getting sick, and the doctors tell, first of all, it takes them weeks to make a diagnosis, especially if the child's been vaccinated. The parents are very upset because the cough can be quite concerning, and they're told by the medical profession that there's nothing that can be done for it, that there's no treatment, kind of a bit reminiscent of COVID. So the vaccination's unnecessary, and as we'll see in a minute, the mortality rate for pertussis fell almost 100% before vaccination programs began. And the decrease or suspension of vaccination that happened in the 1970s in Sweden, which was a bit of a test, which we talk about in Dissolving Illusions, did not increase deaths from pertussis. Vaccination has actually impaired herd immunity. It has not created herd immunity, it has disturbed it. And that we will never eradicate whooping cough with the current vaccines that we have. That's why eradication isn't even discussed. All right, so slide 13, continuing on, that the current whooping cough injectable vaccines cannot prevent transmission, do not prevent transmission, which is why antibiotics are pretty much forced on anyone who is infectious. The vaccine provides defective and limited personal protection at best. The vaccine has induced mutant strains of the bacteria, just like antibiotics can create mutant strains, so can vaccines, and the pertussis vaccine has done it in spades. And these mutants actually have higher invasive capacity. So all of what I just said has created a perceived need for ongoing repetition of vaccines, subjecting recipients to the adverse effects of each one every time that they take a new vaccine. Okay, so next slide, 14. We talked about this a little bit in the last show that we did together, Polly, and we talked about this BPZE1, the new inhale. It basically probably goes up the nose, I think. And know that this has been talked about since the 1940s, developing this. It's been 20 years or more in research, and somehow it recently got funded for development. So far, they're doing trials in super healthy older people, not babies, not newborns, not 2-week-olds. And the exclusion criteria is absolutely nuts as of now. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is a live attenuated by genetic modification inhaled vaccine. And the trials thus far have been done in 18 to 50-year-olds and in 6 to 17-year-olds. Okay, next slide. So I'm just showing you the front page of the trial for the 18 to 50-year-olds. Notice they were all non-smokers and they were fully COVID vaccinated. And okay, so the problem thus far that I can see, the only age group that I would ever even remotely consider giving this new vaccine to would be newborns or babies younger than 2 months old, or people with serious lung disease that will be high risk for complications. And the only thing that could be good about giving it to older people is that maybe, as I've talked about in the past, this wrongly programmed immune systems that were DTAP or DTP or TDAP vaccinated may have a slight chance to get those immune systems shifted to a healthier Th1/Th17 response in the mucosa. So maybe that could possibly happen. Supposedly, the results are stellar in terms of the secretory IgA in the airway and its recall when the person is rechallenged. And it's even supposed to have sterilizing immunity of the airway, similar to natural infection. I'm a bit skeptical on that. But no studies have been done to know what will happen from the vaccine pressure on the circulating strains, the carcinogenicity, or the long-term effects. And if the pharmaceutical industry could be trusted, maybe I could consider this vaccine. But given their track record in terms of corruption, coercion, and the likelihood that any new vaccine being invented will be mandated, I still can't get on board with this. So let's look at the next slide. Slide 16 shows us the exclusion criteria. So any immunosuppression, any autoinflammatory condition, any neoplastic disease or cancer, asthma, any kind of nasopharyngeal abnormality, polyp, sinusitis, history of hepatitis B or hepatitis C, history of alcohol or drug abuse within 5 years, untreated or clinically unstable schizophrenia, so psychiatric disease, psychiatric illnesses, if you've received corticosteroids within 30 days, and coagulation disorders, unwilling to refrain from tobacco, receipt of immunoglobulin or blood products within 90 days, receipt of a vaccine against pertussis. And you see, it just goes on and on. So, my question is always, when you have this kind of exclusion criteria, it shows you how cautious they're being. Okay, that's good. But why are they being so cautious? And will they not later recommend this vaccine to these exact same groups? And will any adverse effects only be discussed in the post-marketing data, kind of like VAERS, which is largely ignored? So besides this vaccine, preclinical studies are investigating mRNA-based pertussis vaccines to target emerging and more resistant strains. So rest assured, mRNA is going to be involved in controlling pertussis into the future. So next slide, 17. So this is what the medical industry has to offer for acute whooping cough cases. And I know this because I have interfaced with hundreds of parents who have been through the medical system itself. Fear is mostly, especially if you're in the office and a vaccine is being offered, antibiotics, cough suppressants, which is the last thing on earth you want to do to a child with whooping cough, dexamethasone, steroids, salbutamol, bronchodilators, lying babies on their backs. This is what they do when you go into a hospital, lie baby on their back. Not something you don't want to do with whooping cough. And then they'll monitor the baby with oxygen, and the alarms will go on and off. They don't actually do anything about it. Usually the baby's just discharged. And then if things go really down the tubes and you don't have vitamin C or any kind of other treatments, then you have something called extracorporeal what is it called? Extracorporeal something oxygenation. It's basically a temporary lung replacement by using a machine. So the medical system has to admit that the majority of whooping cough cases in children are fully vaccinated. It's always been this way, at least since vaccines were widely in use. Antibiotics do not shorten the duration or intensity of the cough once the paroxysms are established. Those are the kind of uncontrollable coughs. Since the disease is toxin-mediated, something that's never addressed within the medical system, the fact that this is a toxin-mediated disease. So one dose of an antibiotic in a very young baby, I mean like very young, like a few weeks old, maybe a month old, may have a positive effect. This is my experience. But most parents who call me regret giving the antibiotics to their children, especially the older kids, after the cough is well established, as they note that the cough actually gets worse. And there's a reason for that. The supposed purpose of the antibiotic is to sterilize the airways so the children won't be contagious. But even that's not reliable, even if you look at the CDC reports. Okay, next slide. So are there any other effective treatments for whooping cough outside the medical system? So I wanted this talk to be a little bit more practical rather than just, going through a vaccine insert and talking about the medical system. What can you actually do? What can parents on the ground really do? Well, there's a lot that you can do. And just like with COVID, you won't be told about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or all the other great things that people did on the side and some doctors lost their licenses over. You won't hear any of this from the conventional medical system. Yet I've been using all these treatments with success since 2012. And why did I get involved in this? I did because I was seeing children with whooping cough in my personal life, and I just thought, this is a horrible cough. Why, how can we supposedly send someone to the moon and we can't deal with whooping cough? And I went looking around the world, and I found some interventions, and I decided, well, nobody else is doing anything. What do I have to lose by trying to help a few people with this? And I was astonished with the results. So vitamin C in therapeutic regular doses, we'll talk about that more in a minute. There's something called the airplane treatment, which I'll get into near the end. There are all kinds of herbs and homeopathy that can be done, although I'll tell you that one of my first introductions to whooping cough was when a friend of mine had 2 children that had the whooping cough, and they went to a very trusted homeopath that was kind of famous in the area. And even the homeopath was freaked out and told them to go ahead and take the antibiotics. So, there are homeopaths and there are homeopaths, and they're just as susceptible to fear and worry as anybody else. But the biggest thing that I've noticed is that sometimes in a breastfeeding mother, if you can restore her foundational health, get them eating good amounts of protein and, decrease their fear and increase their milk production, make their milk healthier, that can make a huge difference. The same goes in children, that are already kind of on their own a bit, like able to walk and talk and feed themselves. Those children are the ones that are more likely to have lost some of their foundational health because of some of the food that they may have been offered or the iPads that they're offered and lack of sunlight, not going outside. So we got to regain the lost foundational health. That comes first before anything else. So there needs to be a good review of lifestyle and diet and all things like that. Especially sugar intake. There's probably lots more. There are probably going to be people in the comments that are going to be talking about all the other things that can be done. Great, try them. But I will just say that my experience is that when people do everything plus the kitchen sink, things don't go as well as when you just kind of stick to the vitamin C treatment and the airplane treatment together. All right, so next slide. I'm just giving you a link here to my vitamin C document, which it's quite extensive and long and full of details, and I'm not going to get into that. If you wanted to do a podcast just on the vitamin C treatment at some point, we could do that. So it's basically based on the fact that if infection goes unaddressed or untreated in vulnerable people, that there can be enormous pertussis toxin accumulation, especially if the child already borders on scurvy. And as I've been through in the past, when people are sick, before they go into a hospital, they do border on scurvy. And then once they're in the hospital, they usually develop scurvy levels of vitamin C, which are not established within the hospital. So it is something that needs to be paid attention to, especially with whooping cough, because when you have a toxin-mediated disease, that's going to use up pretty much all of your vitamin C reserves. And so you're going to need a lot more. So this is what can lead to the harsh coughing, the poor oxygenation, the heart stress, the lung stress, brain stress, and encephalopathy. But it doesn't have to happen. So this document has a ton of information on the vaccine, the illness, and how to lessen the symptoms and get through it. And you can see on my website that there's testimonials. There were so many that I just stopped putting them up, but I continue to get them. Okay, next slide. Look, no talk is complete without looking at these graphs that Roman created for dissolving illusions. This is the United States whooping cough mortality rate, and note the decline in death rates before there was a vaccine and also before antibiotics were available, okay? Avalanche. Next slide, slide 21. We're looking at England and Wales. Since records were ever kept in the UK, we know that 80% of the total decline in mortality occurred before any vaccine or antimicrobial drugs were available, okay? And 90% decline happened before there was any national vaccination program. So this is also true of measles. It's true of scarlet fever. It's true of diphtheria, according to official records and vital statistics that we go through in Dissolving Illusions book. And then the next slide shows you, I'm just flashing up on this, these are a lot of the different diseases up on the right-hand corner, and you can see where the vaccines came in. And this is something that people that are just coming onto the scene should really have a look at. But I know a lot of you regulars already know this. All right, so now let's get to the fun part. And so I'm talking here about the airplane treatment. And so go to slide 23. And this is the other thing that can be done for whooping cough cases, is that you can take your child up in an unpressurized airplane at 10,000 feet for about 40 minutes. And these are two of my patients who took this on and did it. I blocked out the eyes on the left because I did not get permission for that particular one, but I did get permission for the one on the right. This was a little baby. He was 2 months old, and this is him. He's got his little headset on and his little pacifier in there, and his parents took him up. And I think the mom went with him as well. So the whole family can go on a sightseeing tour. And the pilots are usually very happy to do it because they're not afraid of whooping cough. If people are concerned about bacteria being left behind, we get an ozone generator and just ozonate the plane afterwards. That it won't be a problem. So these are two of my very own experiences here, and I've had many more than this. So it's well known that the Royal Air Force Medical Branch was using airplane therapy for over 40 years, as stated in this little article from BMJ. And the standard approach, like I said, is to take an unpressurized closed aircraft to 10,000 feet for 30 to 60 minutes. So treatment of whooping cough by flying high actually began in Strasbourg in 1927 when air pilots took children in the paroxysmal stage, and that's when you want to take them up. That's when you have the best result. Doesn't mean you can't take them up before and after as well. Taking them up to a height of 10,000 feet or about 3,000 meters. So from 1937 to 1939, small-scale trials were carried out in Strasbourg, Switzerland, Germany, Holland, Poland, Spain, Uruguay, Chile, and England. So there's quite a history here. Okay, next slide 25. So there are numerous articles from newspapers talking about children who were taken for flights, and they are either cured or made better. And I'm just showing you two of many. The first article talks about a child 3.5 years old, was getting worse every day, was taken on a plane for 45 minutes, and the pilot in this particular case did dives. So would go up and then do a dive to kind of entertain the child. And the cough became less frequent and less violent. So when you go up high, you have negative pressure, which you feel it in your ears, right? When you go in an airplane, even a pressurized cabin. But when you're in an unpressurized cabin, it's also happening in your lungs in a commercial flight, but in an unpressurized cabin, it's happening more. And so you're having kind of suction, think of it that way, in your lungs. And then when he was doing the dives, which this is the only time I've ever seen this, but it's actually pretty brilliant. You're basically doing a suction and pressure. And the idea is that it's probably moving a lot of the junk that's in the airways and changing the pressure, but also the bacteria are probably intolerant to the oxygen tension up there, as well as the changes in pressure. Nobody's really gotten to why this works, but we do know that it does work. The second one talks about a cure in Adelaide, Australia, after taking 2 flights. A cure, okay? It wasn't just got a little better, it was a cure. Okay, next slide, 26. So these are just more newspaper articles. We've got tons of them, okay? The second article is about a 3-month-old in 1949 where the parents said the treatment worked and the children recovered quickly. Then, as the end of the first article states, once the vaccine was introduced, this thing became a thing of the past, right? We've got a cure. Okay, next slide, slide 27. So this is more from New Zealand and Vienna, Austria. So the first article speaks of a woman pilot who went to New Zealand and functioned as a flight instructor for a few weeks. And at the end of the article, it says that one of the things she did was a series of altitude flights with whooping cough patients, and later got a number of calls from parents stating how the children had improved. And then the Vienna article, this is quite old, it talks of someone in the Nazi flying corps that helped a child with whooping cough. Okay, next slide, slide 28. So this next one is an article from the British Medical Journal in July 1949, and talks about using a decompression chamber with good results. So you don't necessarily have to go flying today. Unfortunately, because we don't have these decompression chambers available to us like they did before, flying is the easiest way to do it. To fly, it's usually a sightseeing flight, where my patients have got this to happen. But you can do the same thing. I think it's similar. My opinion is that I don't think the results are quite as good in the decompression chamber, but it's a much safer way to go. And it could be installed in hospitals. And I think every city should have one, personally. I think this is something we could really offer. But then again, the fear of the disease would go down, and vaccination rates would necessarily go up. So I've actually given Lou the full article that Hilary Butler wrote on these flying treatments, and it'll be available in the link. And all the articles that I've just shown you, as well as this one and a full BMJ article that I'm about to get into, will be available to you. So you can take your time and slowly read it. You can take it take parts of it anyway, to the flight instructors or to the sightseeing places, and show them what people used to do, and they may have heard of it, or they may say that they're happy to help. Okay, the next slide, slide 29, this is an article from April 1955 in the BMJ, where this was a more rigorous study, okay? So during 5.5 years, they looked at 903 patients, but the results could be assessed only in 782, of whom 686 were outpatients and 96 were inpatients. And these children were all quite ill and were treated on the ground in the decompression chamber that I just talked about. And this full article is in the link that Lou just put up. So the next slide, slide 30, I'm just going to show you what I think are the highlights of the article. They categorized people into XX, X, X minus, O, and double O. So double X means there's improvement with marked and rapid, which was marked and rapid in 4 to 7 days or less with virtual cessation of the paroxysmal cough. X means there's improvement, more gradual over 7 to 10 days, but probably significant. And X minus, that's the third one, improvement likely to be attributable to the natural progress of the disease at that state. And the O's are no progress, and the double O's are people that got worse. Okay, so now let's go up to the chart there and look at cough, vomiting, and general conditions. This is table 2. We see a marked rapid improvement with virtual cessation of paroxysmal cough in the double X occurred in 28.2% of the assessed cases, and slower but probably significant improvement, the X's, in a further 34.1%, while 37.7%, the treatment appeared to have no effect. But look at this. If you just take 34, so you're looking at 60% of cases had a significant improvement. Now, if that's probably better than remdesivir. Let's just put it that way. That's better than a lot of things that the medical system has to offer. So just because there are some cases that didn't improve, now my contention for that is that they were either taken up too late or too early, or they should have had a second flight. Because while sometimes the article talks about how second flights or third flights don't make a difference, that's certainly not my experience. And in some of the data they present, it shows that it can make a difference doing it again. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, slide 31, and look at the effect on vomiting, because vomiting is a problem in whooping cough. So what happens is the toxin builds up in the stomach. So the child it's in the lung and they're coughing it up and then they're swallowing it. And if you take the toxin that's in the stomach, and then you consider that we're all making endotoxin or exotoxin in our bowels every day because of the bacteria that's in our bowels. So our liver can keep up with, in general, it can. I mean, unless you're somebody who's having, problems with your gut or your liver. But in general, the liver keeps up with the toxin production in our body. And there's ways to drain it out of the liver and out of the intestine up into the liver using the circulation, and it gets detoxified. But when you start adding massive amounts of toxin by untreated and improperly treated whooping cough, that's when you can have problems. And so it builds up in the stomach, it's toxic to the stomach, and then there's vomiting. Well, vomiting's awful, as everybody knows, But if you're having a cough while you're vomiting, you can aspirate that vomit, and that can be catastrophic. You don't want that to happen. So vomiting is not, I'm not trying to scare people with vomiting, because there is a way to manage it. And I talk about that in my whooping cough paper. But let's look at the results with vomiting when they went up into the sky. So these were see, these were not flights. So this was a decompression chamber as well. Okay, so there's 427 children who were vomiting. They looked at them. So the vomiting actually stopped completely in 57.7%. It was reduced in 20%, and it was unrelieved in 22%. Like, wow, like that's really significant. And the question is, why don't they still have these chambers available to us? Look at this result. How can you say that there's no treatment for whooping cough, but to just lie the baby on its back, take it away from its mother, not even give vitamin C, maybe put an oxygen mask over the baby's face? Ridiculous. We need to have these chambers available. Okay. And it says at the very end here, this was something for which the parents were especially grateful. Yes, I bet they were. And so the last thing I put up here in slide 32 is it's a little paragraph from the article that I just talked about. And it says that Lauener and this must be German names, in Bern, or Swiss actually, treated 256 cases by flights to a height of 12,000 feet, each lasting 1.5 hours. They reported abrupt cure after one flight in 57 or 22.8%, and slower cure over about 8 days in 32%. They also took 24 cases up the Jungfrau at an altitude of 10,000 feet and kept them there 3 hours with results that were disappointing. Well, you don't need to keep them there for 3 hours. And they say there may have been counteracting effect of cold and other factors. A trial of a low pressure chamber treatment in 65 cases taken to the equivalent, 14,000 feet, yielded rapid cure in 31% of children. So, yeah, it's pretty astonishing. And so I think that when we look at the vitamin C treatment and we look at the availability of taking a sightseeing flight, there should be no child that is tortured by whooping cough. Now, there are other things that I always have to do: make sure the child is hydrated, make sure that they're off sugar and bread and rice and all that kind of stuff, that they're eating a high protein diet, that breastfeeding mothers continue to make milk, and you have to sometimes help them along because stress can actually decrease their milk supply. So there are other underlying things that I do pay attention to, but these two things combined, like I've just shown you the whooping cough decompression treatment, and I should say the low pressure treatment. But if you were to combine that with a vitamin C treatment, it's fantastic. So that's what I have to say thus far. Polly, I don't know if there's anything else, any questions you have?
Yes, I do have a few. Well, first of all, as you know, I've been around the family with whooping cough, which has been interesting. It wasn't pleasant, as you know, but the vitamin C was great. Wish I'd known about the whole airplane thing. I never heard of that before.
Polly, I'm so mortified that I didn't tell you about this, because the first case I treated was in 2013, and I actually haven't talked to anybody with whooping cough in quite some time. It just didn't enter my mind. And of course, someone in your family is a pilot, but I don't think you can take them in an F-22. I think it really does have to be a sightseeing flight. And,
it does.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that I honestly never heard of that before. I'm sure many of our viewers would be saying the same thing now. Kind of want to dig more into that. But you say there's a paper by Hilary Butler, or some literature from Hilary that's in there.
Yeah, so Hilary basically compiled all these little articles over, probably 30 years in New Zealand, and she collected the ones from overseas, and she wrote a blog on her website, and I've just included the entire blog for people to see.
And so when the vaccine came out, all of this disappeared. The thought of all of this potential curing of it just went, just like everything else.
Just like everything else. We used to have a lot of really effective treatments. Like we used to use ultraviolet light to treat bacterial infections. It was very effective. And then as soon as the antibiotics came on the scene, nobody used ultraviolet light anymore. But now there's a few, holistic practitioners that are doing all kinds of treatments with ultraviolet light with great success. So same with ozone.
And so this family, which got over it, of course, using Dr. Suzanne Humphries' vitamin C protocol, and luckily live somewhere where it's warm in the sun, so lots of sunlight as well. I think, attributed to getting better. Would you agree with that?
1,000%. I mean, that's something that I've really done deep dives into recently, but basically, looking, I think Jack Kruse was the first person that introduced the concept to me. But there's so far now been a couple of his students that are carrying on the work. And, I'm just going to give you an example is that you remember I lived with you guys in 2017, 2018, and I actually couldn't open a jar. I was handing things to John to be opened because my fingers were so sore and weak. If I kneeled down on the floor, I had to use my arms to help get myself back up. I was really sick, really inflamed. A lot of it was due to stress because I was not obese. I did not have diabetes, but my hemoglobin A1C was high. My ferritin, iron storage levels were high. My platelets were high. An ultrasound showed fatty liver. I mean, I was really stressed out and really sick, and I was doing everything right. I'm drinking pure water. I'm eating a good diet. I'm trying to avoid EMF as much as possible. The one thing I didn't know about that was really helpful to learn from Jack was sunlight. And there's no substitute for sunlight. You need actual sun if you want the best results. It's not just about vitamin D. I mean, what sunlight does in the body is absolutely astonishing. And of course, when you start reading about it, you just go, of course, this makes total sense. I mean, this is how we are created. We were not created to be living indoors with artificial light, with blue light, staring at computers, breathing poor air. But what the sunlight does to us, actually, it basically enlivens us because of what happens within the eyes, what happens to the glandular system afterwards, and what happens with electricity as it goes through our bodies. So I'm not saying to take your child out into the sun to get sunburned. There is a right way to get acclimated to the sun and develop what's called a solar callus. And you want to have your oxidation status really good when you're doing this. You want to have your protein intake nice and high. You want to have your carbohydrates pretty low. And you want to start out in times of the day when it's, either early or late morning, depending on where you live, or early evening when you're just starting out, if you're in a tropical zone or a subtropical zone. And you just want to start getting a little bit of redness periodically. And then as your skin gets more acclimated, you can develop more of a tan. What that tan does is it creates melanin on the skin, which actually helps the rest of your body develop melanin inside. See, people think that you only have melanin on your skin, but it turns out that's absolutely wrong. You have it in your eyes and you have it also in other parts of your body. And it's pretty astonishing what sunlight will do. And so I naively, but just kind of gut instinct, was always telling parents, if you can, get your child out into the sun with just few clothes as possible and get a little bit of pinkness on their skin. But I didn't really understand why. So I really recommend going to Jack Kruse's blogs if you want to do more of a deep dive into that. Really, really great information. And okay, so getting back to me, is that I recently I've been getting blood tests every year, and everything was getting better. But my most recent blood test, everything is completely normal, and the hemoglobin A1C is way, way, way down. And it's not because I changed my diet very much. I mean, I might have added a little more protein, but Polly, I'm no saint when it comes to food. I love food. And I can now do squats, and I can open everything that I want to open with my fingers. And so that was the power of adding sunlight and circadian rhythm back in my life. So that means getting up with the sun and going to bed as early as possible. It means only eating during sunlight hours. Makes a huge difference because that's how we're designed to be.
And no sunscreen. And what do you do if you live in England where they haven't even seen the sun this year?
Okay, so sunscreen, actually ridiculous. But one of the worst things are sunglasses. And this was really a revelation to me because, I was a big sunglass wearer. And what happens when you wear sunglasses is that you become intolerant to the sun, first off. But worse than that is that I can't actually explain to you why this happens, but your body gets tricked into thinking that there's no sun. And so your skin responds as if there's no sun, and it doesn't have any real defense against the sun. But since I stopped wearing sunglasses 2 years ago, I don't burn when I'm out in the sun anymore. And I've talked to lots of people who have started doing this, not wearing the sunglasses, and they don't burn either. And so the first question, but what happens when there's really bad sun strike or, reflection? Well, a couple of things. Like when I'm driving in a car and I get a really bad sun strike, all I do is I put my hand up like this, literally block the sun by going like that, put the visor down or sit up taller. Worst case scenario, have a pair of sunglasses handy if you need to use it for a few minutes, but don't walk around all day with them on, or get a pair of those slit sunglasses, like I guess if you're a skier or something like that, and you know the sun's bothering you. But I found that as I stopped wearing sunglasses, I don't need them as much, and my regular vision and my night vision has improved significantly. I can walk around in the dark now and I don't bump into things. I can actually see in the dark now since I stopped wearing sunglasses and started getting my circadian balance back.
So interesting. Well, as you know, I'm a sunglass queen, so I do need to address that at some point. All right, couple of questions while we've got time. Let's talk about hospitals for a second with whooping cough, because you mentioned that they're not really going to do anything. So having been through with this young mum, it is quite scary when your child is doing that hoop and vomiting, as you said, the vomiting was excessive. But going to hospital is not an option for our family. But if we had, which we wouldn't have done, but say we had, what would have happened to us there? Because I don't want people to panic and go to hospital because they'll
Yeah.
kill
Well,
their child if you're
when
unvaccinated.
I consult with people who have whooping cough, when I consult with the parents, I always say to them, look, I'm not going to judge you and nobody else is going to judge you if you feel scared and you want to take your child to the hospital. You're the one that's sitting there on ground zero, and I have to trust your gut instinct. But what I will say is that 100% of the time when my clients have taken their children to the hospital, literally nothing has been done. But they're at least in a place where if they crash, maybe CPR can be done. But because you don't have to get to that place. They all end up being discharged. But there's one case in particular out in California, and I usually get a Christmas card every year from this family for about 10 years with pictures of the child, because this family called me. It was a 2-month-old in the hospital, and the hospital said the baby was going to die. And out of desperation, the parents were searching the internet and looking around. And of course, they were told they need to get the baby vaccinated and blah, blah, need to give antibiotics. They just kept refusing all of that. And I really didn't want to touch this case with a 10-foot pole, but they were really persistent. And, the squeaky wheel does get the grease. And I then felt confident that, well, they had really nothing to lose and they were really desperate. And I couldn't turn my back on them. So I helped them. And we just started putting some liposomal vitamin C into the baby's mouth, swabbing into the baby's mouth and having the mother be able to hold the baby and still continue to breastfeed, which the hospital really didn't want to happen. And the baby was discharged within 24 hours. So this is what can happen. So what they'll do is they'll basically take the child, they'll lay the child on its back. They may put them in an oxygen tent. They'll put a monitor on the baby's finger and alarm bells will be going off all the time. It's a very stressful situation. They'll usually offer antibiotics, usually want to give antibiotics because, just in case, or maybe because there could be a super infection with another bacteria, or hopefully they're not treating viruses with antibiotics. But I have yet, in all the hundreds of cases I've treated with whooping cough, I have yet to have somebody come back to me and tell me that there was a secondary infection afterwards. I don't believe that it happens when adequate amounts of vitamin C are given during the infection, and even when the infection is gone down. And for a few weeks afterwards, I just don't hear about it. I don't hear of it. So hospitals are good places to pick up disease, as we know. They're good places to catch whooping cough. The youngest child I've treated for whooping cough was 2 weeks, contracted it at birth, and started developing symptoms around 2 weeks old. It was a known exposure, and that there were two actually. One of the one baby that was a lot of work was in, I believe it wasn't a Mennonite community, but it was a religious community. And the whole community got around and rocked the baby overnight, and everybody chipped in to help. The other baby, they really got to much too late, and that baby died. And I didn't have any input into that one, but I did hear about it. So if these people can do it at home with their communities, I think anybody can do it. I've had a lot of kind of really scary cases. 2-month-olds, 1-month-olds, and every last one of them has gotten through. Yes, is it stressful? It's stressful for me. It's stressful for the parents. It's stressful for the baby, but the baby didn't die. The baby didn't have to be taken to a hospital, or in some cases, they are taken to GPs and hospitals and they're turned away and sent home. It's a nightmare to get a diagnosis, especially in a vaccinated, but most maybe there's maybe more knowledge happening today in terms of doctors being able to diagnose the illness, but it's always been a problem. And I remember one quote we put into Dissolving Illusions. There was a meeting among vaccinologists, and one of them said, "I know that there's an expert in the room right now whose own child went undiagnosed for 6 weeks." So getting the diagnosis is number one, and number two is getting proper treatment. I think you can possibly get a diagnosis in the hospital, but getting proper treatment.
And also, if you're unvaccinated, they might kill your child as well. I'm sorry, I can say that because I've been traveling on the bus, and I can't tell you how many unvaccinated people have been killed in the last few years. So when you say things like 2 babies, one unfortunately died, that's going to make some people go, well, okay, Dr. Suzanne, fine. Thank you for that information. I'm going to go and take the vaccine just in case. How many people, we don't know. I don't know that you know this, but people die from the DTaP. People die from the Tdap. We have so many deaths, and you probably won't just get that, by the way, because they normally give you way more when you're in there, just to be careful. So I can't. It's just the fear of your baby dying. I get it. Everybody's afraid of that, but your baby, in my mind, is way more likely to die from any of these vaccines than it is from any of the illnesses.
100%. And I would like to say that the baby that died was 2 weeks old. Okay. So that baby would not have been vaccinated, could not have been vaccinated. You can't vaccinate until 6 weeks. So it's not even a discussion that needs to be had. But absolutely, the whole purpose of this talk is really, I just always tell everybody to go talk to Carrie Bundy if they want to hear about somebody who was told, take this vaccine or your baby could die. And naively, she took the vaccine. And I think it was within 48 or 72 hours, she finds a dead baby in the crib, right? So tell Carrie Bundy that. She'll have a few things to say to you, I reckon.
Right. Oh, that's great. Actually, what we'll do is we'll post Carrie Bundy's story after this show or in the show notes so that you'll be able to all link to it. But what is diphtheria? Because that's in the Tdap and the DTaP. So what is it?
So diphtheria it's thought to be a bacterial illness. We do talk about this in Dissolving Illusions in more detail. However, my understanding is that it is a bacteria. It's called Corynebacterium diphtherium. I think I got that right. And I'll just say that as a young doctor in the hospital, we would do blood cultures on people, and we would regularly get back diphtheria bacteria on the blood cultures. And it would always be just kind of chalked off to being a skin contaminant. We never paid attention to it. It's a skin contaminant. We didn't worry about it. Why? Because it's not actually the diphtheria bacteria itself that was causing problems. There's a bacteriophage that infects the bacteria that makes the bacteria produce a toxin. Again, it's another toxin-mediated disease. And so you'll hear about, you can get a membrane on the back of the throat. You can get kind of this mousy smell and a coating on the tongue. It used to be a killer of people. But again, with adequate vitamin C on board, diphtheria should never be a problem. So you'll see some people with tracheostomy scars, a little hole that's scarred over right here. Then they'll tell you that they had diphtheria as a child. And so this has become, a dreaded disease that needs to be vaccinated for forever. And I remember, I think it was Italy that we had an Italian translation of Dissolving Illusions. And the Italian publishers took it off the market because one boy died of diphtheria on the Italian coast. And that was the end of Dissolving Illusions. So that's why it's in there. And, people will say, oh, we've defeated diphtheria. Well, have we, if we're still getting diphtheroids on skin with blood cultures? And is another disease where we really just need to give more vitamin C when it happens. And then, so diphtheria, and then tetanus, that's the other one. It's a tetanus toxoid. So it's a formaldehyde-treated form of the tetanus toxin. These are all toxin-mediated diseases, right? And so I've talked about tetanus a lot in the past. We can cover this in one of the podcasts in the future. But tetanus is another thing that I've treated. And if you get to it, you understand what it is and you treat it. I've treated it in fully vaccinated people. I've treated it in one woman who has been through the medical system for several months trying to get a diagnosis. She came to me like this with lockjaw. And she didn't die. She didn't have arching back and this, all these kind of muscular problems that people want to scare the population with. So tetanus can just be kind of a crampy muscular problem. That's usually what you'll see. The later it presents after the induction, I should say, or introduction of the bacteria into the body, the better. If you have symptoms straight away, that's going to be a more severe case. So that's the three components that are in the currently available vaccine in the USA and other places.
Yeah, people do not get a tetanus jab. When I was 14 years old, I got bitten by a vole. And I went to my mum and I said, Mum, I need a tetanus jab because the horse riding instructor told me I needed a tetanus jab. And my mum said, no, you do not. That tetanus jab is very dangerous. And I said to her, you are the worst mother in the world. I could die. I could die. And I walked, Suzanne, I walked 2 miles to the doctor to get a single tetanus jab. And then I had to walk home and I nearly fainted on the way back. And I swear I've not been right since that jab.
It's hilarious.
But they don't do single tetanus jabs anymore. But I think that's what's made me sort of like I am. So don't do it, guys. Listen to your mother if they tell you stuff like that. All right, a couple of other questions quickly. You mentioned trials in children. Why is it even legal that we're testing vaccines or drugs on babies and children? Is that not the biggest form of child abuse ever? If you don't know and you're testing on a baby and a child, that should be illegal.
Look, I would just rather kind of burn it all to the ground, quite frankly. So I agree with you 100%. To me, it's really the trials that kind of really stink as well, because, that saline placebos are really very rarely a thing that's used in pre-marketing for drugs. There's always, as you say, the exclusion, I showed you earlier, the exclusion criteria being extremely stringent. And then you have your placebo that'll be kind of the other jab, and it'll be in people that are already fully jabbed. If you're looking at 7-year-olds that we're testing, we're looking at, the youngest age, I think, was 7 to 17 in that age group that they're testing this new snorted vaccine. These kids will already be fully vaccinated with the injected vaccine. And that's probably one of the requirements. And in the older adults, they had to also be COVID jabbed. So I can't remember in the other article if the kids had to also be COVID jabbed. But yeah, the whole thing's absolutely criminal. And then, look, they're really trying to market these new drugs because it's big money. And it's just like we saw, all these doctors being deregistered for prescribing for prescribing ivermectin during COVID. Why is that? Because it's a really cheap drug that's really efficacious. And they had a more expensive drug that's more dangerous and less effective available. And it's just the exact same thing. Now, I do think that with this inhaled vaccine, at least, if we want to be kind, I can say at least they're going in the right direction and they're trying to introduce it into the body in the way that it should be introduced. The results look promising, but, we hear that all the time where results look promising in certain trials, and then we mass market it and we see the events that have occurred either with resistance of the bacteria or with horrible adverse effects. There's also, I meant to go through this, but in the package insert for the Daptocel, there's a few charts, and you can get this online. These package inserts are really easy to get a hold of, despite what you might hear. But there's one chart. Here it is. Okay, so here we go. Percentage of infants with local or systemic reactions. Oh my goodness, it's just like tenderness anywhere, 50%, fever, 65%, 72%, fretfulness, okay? Fretfulness, dose 1, 2-month-olds, 82%. Dose 2, 4-months-old, 85%. Fretfulness in these little children, drowsiness. In dose 1, 56%. Dose 2, 50.6%. Like, these babies are having some really bad reactions, and that's acceptable in these trials. I'm just really unhappy about that.
Yeah. All right, quick questions. I know we're running out of time. You also mentioned no travel, ideally, with your child before 2 months of age. That's great advice. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Hardly anybody takes it, though. And I think this was kind of ancient wisdom, really, that, a mother and baby, as they're, that baby, I described something called the 3-year pregnancy, because, you've got the 9 months of gestation, and then you've got that period afterwards that's actually just as important, where that mother is providing the immunity for that baby and helping that baby's immune system to develop based on the antigens that she's introducing through the world, and her breast milk that's got the answers to those antigens, as well as, transferring stem cells and bacteria and all kinds of other important factors in that breast milk. And so when you take a baby on an airplane, you're exposing it to numerous amounts of antigens that it shouldn't be exposed to. You're exposing that baby. I'm talking about a commercial airplane and a well baby, okay? Yeah, you're exposing it to the chemicals that they've sprayed before you got on, the changes in pressure. Oh my gosh. I mean, in landing, I remember I didn't learn to clear my ears until I was an adult, and it just was so painful until I learned to clear my ears. But babies can't do that. And, you hear babies crying on airplanes. Why? Well, that's why. It's really unpleasant feeling for them, not to mention all the exposures that they're going to have. It's not ideal to have a baby become sick before they're 2 months old, because look, the vaccinologist, there's a grain of truth in what they said. It's a fully developed immune system, but it's not yet ready to go to battle. It's kind of like, saying, you've got this teenager at West Point. You're not ready to send them off, into a full war. They're not there yet. And there's lots of reasons for that I go through in my infant immunity series that's available on Odyssey, where I talk about the 3-year pregnancy. So I don't even recommend going out to coffee clubs and things like that a lot of mothers want to do. Even when people come to the house, everybody wants to hug and kiss, be all over the baby. I just think sequestering as long as possible is the best way to go, because you don't want to have to deal with any kind of infection, whether it's whooping cough or measles or anything, before 2 months of age. It's just not ideal. After 2 months of age, I'm pretty confident that I can get people through just about anything, but those young babies really need to be protected.
Brilliant. Fantastic advice. Now, where do people get Dissolving Illusions? You do not have to get it on Amazon, everyone. You can go to dissolvingillusions.com. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, and it's translated into several different languages, most recently simplified Chinese, but we have it, I think, in 9 or 10 languages now, and we have other options for you where you don't have to use Amazon if you don't want to.
And you should all follow Dr. Suzanne on X. And what are you there?
I am DrSuzanneh7.
All right, fantastic. Dr. Suzanne Humphries, thank you so much for your amazing wisdom. We will see you back on CHD TV again soon with new information for you all. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
I'm Carrie Bundy, and this is Bryce. He was born totally normal. He was happy. He was healthy. And this was his newborn picture. So these were taken the day he came home, 3 days old. And he was very alert, very aware.
How premature was he?
5 weeks.
Wow, 5 weeks.
And he didn't have a NICU stay. He was our only child that did not have a NICU stay, which was shocking because he was the smallest, earliest. So he got his first round of shots at 2 months old. And that round of shots changed him right away. He went from a normal baby. He was our third, so we knew what normal meant. Babies are fussy sometimes, but he started screaming 23 hours a day. He had just been hospitalized for RSV. And when we went in, I said, I don't feel comfortable with him being vaccinated because he's just been so sick. I think that we need to wait. And the pediatrician looked at Bryce and I and said, if you don't vaccinate your son, who was born at 35 weeks and is a premature baby, you're signing his death certificate for this whooping cough.
So let's get this clear. The pediatrician said if you don't vaccinate your child...
You're essentially signing his death certificate, which was very ironic.
Are you both there?
Yeah. Because I didn't want to do it, and Bryce was like, we have to do this to keep him safe. I mean, the doctor knew who to target of the two of us.
Because the moms always question everything first, and the dads just kind of go with what everybody else is doing. So
well, I mean, I was more like you. I just went with the medical.
Right.
I just can't get over that. So they cannot get over the paediatrician coming out with that line. If you don't vaccinate him, you'll be signing his death certificate.
Right.
That's tragic. Okay, so then what happened?
So he got vaccinated. This was March 1st. And the next few days, he was really calm, which was weird because he'd been screaming for 2 straight months.
They wouldn't make eye contact.
And
he
we have
wouldn't look at
videos
you.
of
He
that.
wouldn't respond to you.
He just kind of looked at the ceiling, and anytime you tried to get in his way, he would just look around you.
So 2 days of that.
Yeah.
And then
It
what
was
happened?
it was 3. It was March 4th. He actually had the best day that he'd had in 2 months. He was smiling. He met my mom's best friend that morning. And we have pictures that day of him sitting quietly with Ella, who was 6 at the time, and just learning to reading books. And that's the last picture I have, because we went up to our room and I walked up to kiss him goodnight. It was 12:06 in the morning, and I bent over. It was dark in our room, and we just had a nightlight. And I kissed his cheek, and it was like an ice cube. And I just started screaming to Bryce, he's dead. He's dead. And everything that I knew, I know how to do CPR. I'm certified in this. I just stepped back and screamed. And Bryce walked in and just grabbed him and ran. And I'm like, where are you going? As I'm chasing him down the stairs, and he's like, I'm taking him to the doctor at midnight. And he was gone in his Camaro, no car seat, nothing, just had Mason on his lap.
So I grabbed him, I get in the car, and I'm trying to do CPR while I'm driving, and it's raining. And I just pulled to the emergency room, and ran and said that he's dead. And they started working on him, and it was probably about an hour before we got somebody to carry so she could leave our other kids to come to the emergency room to be with me. And there was nothing since they did epinephrine, they gave him all these shots, and his body was just swelling from all the medicine they were trying to give him to get him going again. It was the first time that this hospital had ever had to deal with anything like this. And we had to tell them to stop because he was gone. And they didn't want to stop because they had never experienced that before as a hospital. So Carrie had to be the parents, like, he's gone.
When Bryce was at the hospital and I got there, I did not arrive to my husband. I arrived to a man that was crumpled up on the ground, sobbing, not talking to me. We were surrounded by police, separating us, questioning us. Did you ever hurt your child? And it's just, I saw Mason and I knew he was dead. I knew he wasn't coming back. And I knew every time I looked at him again that there's nobody in there. That's just his body, and there's nothing there. And right now I need my husband. And so he went home and he slept, and I woke up and had to tell my 6-year-old why her brother wasn't here anymore. And we slept on the couch, and when she woke up, I just told her that something happened. We didn't know what happened, and Mason died last night, and he's never going to come back.
Well, then we had to watch our 1-year-old look for him.
Right, because Lucy was 18 months old.
She was looking in the bouncy seat. She didn't understand because she was so little.
And my parents removed the rest of the stuff. Like my dad, who was with the kids when I finally went to the hospital, he moved everything into Mason's room and shut the door. So like the swing, the diapers, everything that was his was no longer there. I didn't want it there. I was like, I don't want to see any of it when I get home. And Lucy was looking for even the swing. She was calling his name. She called him Bubba, trying to say brother. And she's like, Bubba, Bubba, looking everywhere. And you just cannot tell, a baby that's under 2 years old, like what happened. So she doesn't remember him, but she knows of him because she's heard us talk about him. This isn't like a stillbirth or a miscarriage, which is equally devastating, but like we have a year where Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, there was a child in these pictures with us that the next year was gone.
There's no words really of that. I mean,
No, there's not.
I'm sorry.
And it was the week that he died. It was the day of his funeral that someone said, had he just been vaccinated? And I said, F you for even asking that. How could you ask that? You're asking me if I did it? If I caused him to die? And it was. And I think that the reason that there isn't as much said about parents that vaccinate and their child dies is we have this stigma and we have all of this guilt, because essentially if we would have known better, this never would have happened and we'd still have a child.
What's your message to parents people that are just thinking about becoming parents? What would you say to them?
You just have to educate yourself because you can't rely on somebody else to tell you the information, which is that's what we did because we didn't know any better. And you just have to have an informed choice.
And with Oliver, who is our son that was born 2 years later, he actually got whooping cough. at a year old. So the very vaccine that Mason was given that killed him was preventing the disease that our next son had. And they make you think this child's going to die. And he was fine. And so it was even harder to see that this disease that I had been so scared of, that I didn't listen to my intuition, was not as scary as I've been led to believe.
And he's still here today.
Right.
Stronger than
Right.
ever before.
And he's very healthy.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.